As we're getting closer to the end of 2024, it is time to take a look at projections on how Polish economy will fare in the coming months, what to look out for, and how the internal and external factors are going to influence Polish economy, where our things are going to improve, and what are the greatest challenges. Joining me now in the studio to have this discussion is Paweł Karbownik, Polish Deputy Finance Minister. Thank you for joining. It's great to have you back.
Thank you for having me.
So what is the economic outlook for Poland in 2025? Next year's budget assumes that the GDP will grow and reach 3.9%, but a couple of banks recently already slashed their predictions. For example, the PKO BP, the biggest bank in Poland, went down to 3.5% when it comes to their predictions. What's the outlook?
Well, certainly growth has accelerated in Poland. Just to recall that we've inherited an economy that was not growing at all. So this year alone, we expect growth to reach around 3% of GDP, whereas next year, indeed, the projections are closer to 4%. Obviously, it's difficult to predict today whether it's going to be 3.9, 4.1 or 3.6. And as we have seen last week with economic data, positive economic data, they can also surprise on the positive side. So I wouldn't like to, make other projections than what we already have in the budget, which is like 4.9% of GDP next year, and inflation at 5%.
Inflation 5%. So if we were to take into account the lower predictions, are you confident that Poland can actually still reduce its deficit in a 4-year frame without significant cuts to expenses?
Well, the fiscal framework and cuts in the deficits are already forecasted with the investment and GDP outlook that we have in mind, and this is also what we have discussed with the European Commission. Mm-hmm. So I wouldn't like to already go in those pessimistic scenarios, because indeed there is a huge magnitude of investments that are coming into the pipeline. Just to recall that we have historically highest investments in the budget foreseen for defense, for healthcare. Also, for the first time in history, we have designed over 4 billion Polish zlotys for the build-up of nuclear power plant. We have record investments for railways. So I think these investments will accelerate the economy. And if you are talking to the economists and to the banks, there is already a positive spillover effect from the EU funds, the RRF, what we call it. So I would say that we are rather sticking to the projections, and we shall see what comes up next year.
So you mentioned those EU funds. There is an increase, obviously, but aside from that, how are you planning to make that growth happen in Poland? There's going to be a big influx of EU funds, but what apart from the funds?
So, as I have said, we have already dedicated massive investments in the national budget. We will have massive investments from the EU funds. And obviously, we are working on improving the business environment. So we're also talking to investors, also preparing some fields of economy that could be entered, like, for example, innovation. We have big interests from innovative companies. So I think, there is a broad spectrum of policies, and certainly some reforms of the investment framework, innovation framework in Poland. This could improve the outlook.
We're around the corner from Donald Trump being sworn into office as the 47th president of the United States. The change in the White House is definitely going. We've already seen some ripple effect after the election at the beginning of November, and there's going to be a definite impact on the European economy, which involves Polish economy. How do you think Donald Trump taking over office is going to affect Polish economy in 2025? Are we to look for any certain changes?
So maybe let me start by saying that Donald Trump loves Poland. And we've worked with him in the G7 when we were working in Brussels with Prime Minister Tusk. So we've welcomed Donald Trump during his first visit to Europe as a president, and then for a couple of years we've been cooperating with him, his administration within the G7. And whenever he was referring to Poland, he was always very optimistic and enthusiastic, even, I would say. So I think, this is on the positive side. When you ask me about economic tensions, we shall see. I mean, the projections that there are from the European Commission indicate that any trade conflict would harm in the first place the US, not Europe. So I think there will be a very intense dialogue when the new administration takes office, and certainly our presidency will be part of this dialogue. We already have foreseen a discussion about it at the EU finance ministers in January. Minister Domański will chair a dinner of EU finance ministers on the 20th of January when Donald Trump takes office. So it's very timely. And we will try to see what kind of a dialogue we could have with the American administration so that the outcome of these negotiations is positive for both sides, because we believe that, with a trade conflict, both sides could lose, and certainly it's nothing.
Most definitely. But we did hear about the possible tariffs. Do you think that there is a possibility that there would be some sort of a standoff and in terms of tariffs between Europe and the US, and how would that affect Poland?
Donald Trump is a deal maker. And already in her first call, the President of the European Commission has indicated that probably we could buy more LNG. As we know, Donald Trump will increase the production of gas in the US. So there is a scope for a conversation. Some economists indicate that the big outflows in terms of trade to the US are a result from the presence of big pharma in a few member states, which basically make great business in Europe. So I think this conversation is much more complex than just slashing tariffs.
Obviously, when we talk about Donald Trump and we're considering the situation in Europe, we cannot forget about, for example, defense spending. We also have in Europe persistent problems with balancing budgets in the EU, and there has to be more spending given to the defense. Do you think that EU fiscal rules should be discarded altogether, or perhaps modified to be able to work more collectively?
So we have a new fiscal framework in the EU which takes into account the increase of defense spending. Of course, there is a question how to interpret these new rules, and this is the conversation that we will be having during the Polish presidency, but it's already being taken care of in the regulation. So that's the first point. And secondly, obviously, as you know, Poland spends the most from all the NATO countries, and we ask our colleagues and express our sort of, I don't want to use the word demand, but expectation that our European colleagues contribute significantly much more than today. And this is something that we brought up to the table already last year in December from the first Council of EU Finance Ministers. Consistently during each meeting, we've been saying that the new administration of Donald Trump is coming and that the Europeans have to spend much more. And this is the conversation we're going to have during the presidency.
I'm very happy you mentioned the presidency, because on the 1st of January, Poland is taking over the rotating EU Council presidency. When talking about defense, when talking about the spending and the economy, what do you think is going to be Poland's aim and goal towards a more unified stance when it comes to spending in Europe in face of the challenges that we have on the continent right now?
So, as I've said, we try to convince other friends that they need to spend much more, but that's not enough. We need to coordinate and we need to decide collectively what needs to be done in terms of defense building capabilities in Europe so that Europe is safe. And this is the conversation that's going to start. It's already started, but it will be reinvigorated during a leaders' summit at the beginning of February. Where the European Commission will present a paper, and we have discussed it with the Commissioner in charge of Defense, Commissioner Kubilius. Mr. Domański met him 2 weeks ago to ask him for a list of, I would say, a shopping list, if I may say so, what needs to be bought so that the Europeans are safe. And once we get this list around February, in April we'll have a discussion here in Warsaw where again Minister Domański will chair the ECOFIN, so EU finance ministers, where he will discuss the issue of how to finance those needs, what is the impact on the economy, but also what's the impact on innovation, because for example in the US it's not by coincidence that Elon Musk has used defense funds to boost his private business. So there is a big spillover effect when it comes to economy innovation.
Thank you so much. Paweł Karbownik, Deputy Finance Minister, thank you for joining me here in the studio.
Thank you for having me.
And so this would be all the latest news for now here on World News Tonight, but please do stay tuned on TVP World. We'll be back in just a moment with more news and features.